On the corner of Main Street, tucked between a hardware store and a diner, stood a little tailor shop with a hand-painted sign, Malcolm James, Fine Tailoring. The front window displayed three mannequins, each dressed in carefully crafted suits. One a sharp charcoal gray, another a deep navy with subtle pinstripes, and the third a bold cream-colored summer suit. They weren't flashy or branded, but they carried something rare, elegance born from skill, not from a factory label. Inside, the shop smelled faintly of pressed wool and cedar. Bolts of fabric lined the walls in neat stacks. Smooth Italian wools, textured tweeds, soft cottons. An old Singer sewing machine hummed steadily in the corner, and the rhythmic snip of scissors on cloth filled the air. Behind the counter, Malcolm James bent over a jacket in progress, his fingers moving with the precision of someone who had spent his entire life perfecting a craft. Malcolm was a tall man with a calm presence. His hands, though calloused, handled fabric like something fragile and alive. Every stitch was deliberate, every seam pressed to perfection. He didn't just make clothes, he made garments that gave people dignity. To Malcolm, tailoring wasn't about fashion trends or profit margins. It was about artistry, heritage, and care. But as much as he poured his heart into his shop, many in town didn't see it that way. Customers passed by his window with polite disinterest or, worse, condescending smirks. "Who even wears suits anymore?" they would mutter. Others, more openly cruel, would say, "That little shop won't last a year." Malcolm heard the whispers, but he didn't let them sink into his spirit. He remembered his father's words, spoken long ago while teaching him to thread a needle. "Son, people will always need to walk with pride. Your stitches give them that." Each morning, Malcolm swept the stoop, polished the glass, and adjusted his mannequins with quiet determination. The town might not have recognized his gift yet, but he knew what he was building. His shop wasn't just a business, it was a legacy. And one day, he believed, they would see it too. Malcolm's shop had been open for only a few months when the mockery began to take shape. At first, it was the casual comments whispered outside his window. Teenagers laughing as they passed, men shaking their heads with a smirk. What kind of fool opens a suit shop in a town where everyone wears jeans? But soon, the remarks grew louder and sharper. People walked by and said things just loud enough for Malcolm to hear. "He thinks he's some big city tailor." Or worse, "Nobody here's going to buy a suit from him." The most cutting remarks, however, came from Karen Whitfield. She owned a boutique just a few blocks away, a pristine white storefront with imported dresses and shiny advertisements plastered in the windows. She liked to remind everyone that hers was the only real fashion store in town. One afternoon, she walked into Malcolm's shop with her arms folded and a thin smile on her face. She strolled slowly past the mannequins, running her manicured fingers over the fabric before letting out a dismissive laugh. She said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Handmade suits. How quaint. But tell me, Mr. James, who exactly do you think is going to wear these? The farmers? The fishermen? This isn't New York City. People here don't need this." She waved her hand dismissively at his racks of carefully tailored jackets. Malcolm straightened his posture, meeting her eyes calmly. People everywhere deserve to look their best. A suit isn't about the city. It's about dignity, about confidence. Karen chuckled and turned toward the door. "Confidence doesn't pay rent, Mr. James. Labels do. Remember that." And with a sharp click of her heels, she left. Her words spread quickly. Her words. Customers who might have been curious now hesitated, fearful of being mocked for buying from him. Karen's friends from the wealthier side of town sneered openly. "Real suits have designer tags," they would say, "not something stitched together in a little shop on Main Street." Despite the coldness, Malcolm pressed on. He worked late into the night, his sewing machine humming against the silence, determined to prove that quality didn't need a fancy label. Yet, as he looked out at the empty street some evenings, he couldn't help but wonder if they were right. Was his shop doomed to be nothing more than the butt of their jokes? What Malcolm didn't know was that the first sparks of change were already on the horizon. All it would take was one client willing to believe in him. It was late on a Tuesday afternoon when the bell above Malcolm's shop door jingled, breaking the quiet hum of his sewing machine. He looked up, half expecting another curious onlooker who would leave without buying anything. But instead, in walked Mr. Harris, a middle school music teacher known around town for his patience and kind demeanor. "Mr. James," Harris said, removing his hat respectfully, "I've got a recital coming up with my students, and I don't want to look like I just rolled out of bed. Do you think you could make me something that fits right?" Malcolm's face softened into a smile. "I'd be honored." He measured Harris carefully, listening as the teacher spoke about his students and the importance of setting an example. Malcolm chose a fabric that was sturdy but elegant, a dark blue wool with just a hint of sheen under the light. Over the next 2 weeks, he worked meticulously, shaping the jacket so it rested naturally on Harris's shoulders, tapering the trousers so they moved with ease, and hand-stitching the lining with tiny details only Harris would know were there. When Harris tried it on, his face lit up. He turned in the mirror, standing taller than Malcolm had ever seen him. "I look professional," he whispered, almost in disbelief. "Like I deserve to be at the front of that stage." "You've always deserved it," Malcolm replied softly. "The suit just reminds you." At the recital, Harris conducted with confidence, his crisp new suit catching the stage lights. Parents in the audience couldn't help but notice. "He looks sharp tonight," one whispered. "Where'd he get that suit?" another asked. Word began to spread. A week later, a local jazz musician came in. "Heard you stitched up Mr. Harris. I've got a gig in the city, and I can't show up looking like a mess. Can you help me out?" Then a school principal. Then a young man preparing for his first job interview. Each one walked out of Malcolm's shop transformed, not just dressed differently, but walking taller, prouder, as though Malcolm's suits carried more than thread. They carried respect. Still, the laughter from some corners of town hadn't stopped. Karen and her friends dismissed his early clients as small people with small events. But Malcolm noticed something changing. Every time one of his customers stepped out into the world, more people began to ask, "Who dressed you?" And slowly, his once empty appointment book began to fill. What started as a trickle was turning into a current, and Malcolm knew it was only the beginning. It started with a photograph. At the Spring Jazz Festival, the local paper snapped a picture of the town's saxophonist, Raymond Cole, playing under the stage lights. He wore the suit Malcolm had tailored, a sleek black piece with satin lapels and a perfect fit that made him look like he belonged in a New York club. The photo ran on the front page the next morning with the caption, "Local musician shines at festival." But what caught people's eyes wasn't just Raymond's music. It was his look. "Who dressed him like that?" people asked over coffee at the diner. "That doesn't look off the rack." Soon after, the reporter followed up with a human interest piece. "The man behind the stitch, Malcolm James, Tailor of Main Street." The article described Malcolm's tiny shop, his dedication to detail, and the growing reputation of his custom suits. There were photos of his mannequins in the window and of Malcolm himself, measuring tape around his neck, smiling humbly as he worked over a bolt of fabric. The piece spread beyond town. Copies of the paper reached neighboring cities, and word began to travel. There was a black tailor in Maplewood, making suits as fine as anything from the big-name boutiques. Within weeks, new customers arrived who weren't locals at all. A lawyer from the next county, a young couple who wanted matching outfits for their wedding, even a city councilman who confessed quietly, "I've had suits from department stores that cost triple, but nothing fits me like this." Malcolm's once quiet shop began buzzing with activity. He stayed up past midnight, stitching, pressing, adjusting. His fingers were raw, his back sore, but for the first time since opening, he felt alive with purpose. Neighbors who once smirked when they walked by now peeked through the glass with curiosity. Some even stepped inside, sheepishly admitting they'd been wrong to doubt him. Karen, however, grew restless. She watched with envy as Malcolm's window drew more attention than her polished boutique. Her friends whispered about it too. "Did you hear? He's booked for months. That paper called him an artist." One afternoon, Karen marched into her boutique, slammed the door, and muttered to herself, "This town is losing its standards. They're choosing him over me?" But no amount of her bitterness could stop the current. Malcolm's name was spreading, his reputation growing. The man they once mocked was becoming something none of them could ignore, a craftsman in demand. And beyond the town's borders, larger eyes were beginning to notice. As Malcolm's reputation soared, Karen's bitterness hardened into something sharper: obsession. She had built her boutique on exclusivity, imported labels, glossy advertisements, and carefully cultivated clients who loved the status of wearing something expensive. Now, those same clients were whispering about Malcolm James. Some even defected outright. One of her best customers walked past her shop one Saturday and went straight into his. It was too much. Karen began her campaign. First came the whispers. She leaned close to women at the salon and said, "Well, his suits may look nice, but who knows what kind of standards he's keeping in that little shop? Hygiene? Proper licensing?" Then came the official complaints. One morning, Malcolm found a notice taped to his door. A city inspection was scheduled to review his business compliance. 2 days later, another letter arrived questioning his signage, then another citing possible zoning issues. It didn't take long for Malcolm to realize who was behind it. Still, when the inspector came, Malcolm welcomed him in. He showed him his spotless workroom, his carefully stored fabrics, and his neatly labeled tools. The inspector found nothing amiss. "You're running a clean, professional shop, Mr. James," he said as he signed off the report. Karen fumed when she heard, but she wasn't finished. She tried to poison his reputation with customers. Standing in the cafe one morning, she raised her voice so all could hear, "A real suit should come from Milan or Paris, not from someone stitching cloth in a corner shop. Do you really think his work will hold up under scrutiny?" Ironically, it was her words that spurred Malcolm's customers to rally behind him. One by one, they spoke out in his defense. "Malcolm made my wedding suit. It fit like a dream. My son wore his suit to his first job interview and got hired. That man puts more care into a single seam than most factories do into an entire jacket." Their voices grew louder than Karen's. And then came the invitation, the very thing Karen had feared most. The State Association of Tailors and Designers announced an upcoming competition, Excellence in Craftsmanship. It was one of the most prestigious showcases in the region. Malcolm had been nominated by a client who believed his work deserved recognition beyond the borders of their small town. When Karen heard, her face paled. If Malcolm succeeded there, it wouldn't just be her clients she'd lose. It would be her claim as the town's true authority on fashion. She clenched her teeth and muttered, "Not if I can help it." But for Malcolm, the invitation was no cause for fear. It was validation. All the laughter, the smirks, the complaints, none of it mattered now. His work was about to be tested on the biggest stage of his career. And he was ready. The grand hall of the State Association of Tailors and Designers gleamed under chandeliers. Rows of mannequins dressed in the finest garments from across the state lined up like soldiers. Every major boutique and design house had come to prove themselves. For Malcolm, who had arrived with 3 carefully packed suits and a quiet determination, it felt like stepping into another world. He carried no entourage, no flashy brand banners, just a rolling case with his work inside. When he laid out his pieces, one midnight blue tuxedo with satin lapels, one charcoal gray 3-piece with subtle window pane check, and one ivory suit with hand-stitched embroidery, there was a hush among the assistants and designers nearby. They leaned closer, running their eyes over the invisible stitching. The way the fabric seemed to breathe as though it had been born to take shape on a body. "Who did this?" one murmured. "A tailor from Maplewood," another replied, almost in disbelief. The judging began. Designers from big city houses presented bold, loud pieces, lavish fabrics, experimental cuts, extravagance meant to shock and dazzle. But when Malcolm's turn came, he did not perform or preen. He simply stood beside his work and said quietly, "Clothes should not speak louder than the person wearing them. These suits are made to give people dignity, pride, and presence. The judges examined his suits up close. They touched the seams, inspected the lining, felt the balance of the shoulders. Whispers spread through the room. Perfect. Flawless handwork. This is extraordinary. When the models walked the runway in Malcolm's creations, the hall fell silent. The midnight blue tuxedo seemed to shimmer under the lights. The gray three-piece moved with an elegance that made the model stand taller, and the ivory suit drew audible gasps. It looked timeless, regal, yet utterly wearable. By the time the applause broke out, even Malcolm himself was taken aback by its strength. That evening, the announcer's voice rang out. Winner of the State Award for Excellence in Tailoring, Malcolm James Maplewood. The room erupted. Malcolm, humble and steady, stepped onto the stage. He shook the hand of the chairwoman of the association, who whispered, "You've reminded us of what true tailoring is." Photographers snapped photos. His name was printed in papers across the state the next morning. Small-town tailor stuns judges, wins top honors. Back home, the news spread faster than wildfire. Clients lined up outside his little shop. People who once mocked now spoke his name with pride. Even the mayor stopped by, ordering a custom jacket. And Karen? She watched from the window of her boutique as Malcolm's line stretched down the block. For once, she had no words. Her sneers had sunk beneath the weight of his triumph. Malcolm didn't celebrate with champagne or speeches. Instead, he stayed late in his shop that night, running his hand over the fabric bolts stacked neatly on the shelves. His father's voice echoed in his mind. Your stitches will give people pride. And now, the world had finally seen what his father always knew. When Malcolm returned from the state competition, the quiet corner of Main Street where his shop stood was no longer the same. People lined the sidewalk, clapping and cheering as he stepped out of his car. Children waved little cardboard signs that read, "Our tailor, our champion." Parents snapped pictures, and even the local paper's photographer was there to capture the moment. Malcolm, dressed simply in his work shirt, with measuring tape still around his neck, smiled modestly and raised a hand in thanks. He had never sought the spotlight, only the craft. But now, the spotlight had found him. Within weeks, Malcolm's shop transformed from a small, overlooked store to the pride of the town. Customers traveled from distant cities, some driving for hours just to be fitted by him. His once empty appointment book overflowed with names, and for the first time, Malcolm had to hire 2 apprentices to help manage the workload. On the day of the official unveiling, the mayor and community gathered outside the shop. A new plaque was mounted beside the door, polished bronze that gleamed under the midday sun. It read, Malcolm James Atelier, State Award winner for excellence in tailoring, a legacy of craft, pride, and community. As the cloth was pulled away to reveal the plaque, the crowd erupted in applause. Lila, Malcolm's niece, hugged his arm tightly. "Uncle Malcolm," she whispered, "you're famous now." Malcolm chuckled softly. "Not famous, sweetheart. Just seen." Even those who had once mocked him now approached with respect. The same men who had laughed about nobody wearing suits now stood proudly in jackets he had made. The women who had once sneered now complimented the elegance of his cuts. Karen, however, was absent. Her boutique still stood on the same street, but its windows were quieter now, her customers fewer. Rumor had it she refused to even say his name, but that no longer mattered. Her disdain had been drowned out by a chorus of admiration. That evening, when the crowd had dispersed and the shop lights dimmed, Malcolm sat alone at his workbench. He touched the plaque gently, then picked up a jacket in progress. With needle and thread in hand, he leaned forward, his fingers moving with the same care they always had. The awards, the applause, the recognition, they were all gratifying. But what mattered most was still the same thing. Every stitch, every seam, every suit carrying dignity to the person who wore it. As the clock ticked softly in the background, Malcolm smiled to himself. The little shop they once mocked had become the pride of the town, and his father's words, once just a memory, now echoed as truth for everyone to see. Your stitches will give people pride. And they had.